there's more.
There's more. Oh, are you kidding me?
It's left with a presentation. Good evening. Welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting of Thursday, January 12th, 2017. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:58. For the record, the Monomoy Regional School Committee met in executive session from 6:30 till 6:50. Discussed strategy with respect to collective bargaining units for certain MREA stipends and SEIU contract. And as I said, we came out of the executive session at approximately 6:50. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. We have minutes from what day? December 8th. Is there a motion?
Move that we accept the minutes as presented.
I would second.
Is there a second?
Any discussion?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
In the top of page 2 is some information about Connor Choice. It says Deanna Jensen, Executive Director of Connor Choice, was invited to speak.
Chip, go ahead, I'm ready.
Okay. On behalf of the Connor Choice program, which is in its first experimental year at Chatham Elementary, actually it had completed its second year last spring. In addition, it was funded through various organisms, not just the PTO, but also some of the funding came from the school, the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod, and the Chatham Fund of the Cape Cod Foundation.
So what specifically are you seeking to change the wording to?
They completed their second year at Chatham Elementary, that it was funding by the PTO and the other organizations that I just mentioned, and that they are currently working with researchers at Yale and MIT.
Is that contrary to what's in there, or is that in addition to what's in there?
The first two are contrary, the second one is an addition.
Any objection to the amended? Oh, Ms. Ryder.
The program worked The last sentence, it was my understanding that Falmouth Public Schools secured their $100,000 grant, but it wasn't with Commerce Choice. They actually secured it in order to have their elementary schools become Commerce Choice providers. And somehow that seems different than that last sentence.
Any discussion of the proposed change to the minutes?
I just missed that last thing you said, Karen. The Falmouth Public Schools, they secured a $100,000 tower grant to become independent of Commerce Choice, because I thought they got a grant to continue to host Commerce Choice in their school.
The Falmouth schools secured a grant from the Tower Fund to allow their elementary schools to become independent Commerce Choice providers, or independent, to provide it independently. So it was like a train-the-trainer model. And the $100,000 grant, I believe, covers the cost in order to have to go through the train-the-trainer program.
Any objection to that amendment to the minutes? With that modification, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstained? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody who would like to speak to address the school committee at this time? Okay, hearing none. Next item is student representatives. I believe we have Lauren Handel from the Monomoy Regional High School. There she is. Hi, Lauren.
Hi. So my name is Lauren Handel. I'm a senior here at Monomoy, and I've been asked to summarize some of the happenings at Monomoy High School. So alumni and current MRHS music students came together last Friday for an awesome alumni show. Siblings had a chance to perform duets and group numbers together on stage. Additionally, art students have started to prepare for the March performance of the spring musical Catch Me If You Can. On Wednesday, December 28th, the Monomoy community paid tribute to Jordan Fisher in a game versus DY in the annual Stripes tournament. This Saturday, January 14th at 2 p.m., Monomoy will be hosting the first ever Jordan Fisher Memorial Tournament. It will be held at the Harwich Community Center gym, and all the money raised will go into a scholarship fund. Jossum Hour is in the works, and students are very excited about it. All of the details are still being sorted out, but the 1-hour lunch break will ultimately provide students more support and enrichment during lunch. Monomoy students are certainly mature enough to be and responsible with free time, and we're excited to have the opportunity to show it. Every month, science, technology, and engineering students are selected by their teachers to be acknowledged for their commitment to learning. The STE Bright Lights to be recognized during January are 8th grader Jane Howard, freshman Shannon Holbrook, sophomore Marie Zavadoza, junior Cody Doyle, and senior Julie Locantori. In track sports, boys basketball has a 3-5 record to date, and they have a game tomorrow at 7 p.m. against SJP in Hyannis. Girls basketball has a 6-4 record and a home game tomorrow night against Sandwich at 6:30. Boys ice hockey is 0-6-1 with a game on Saturday in Hyannis at 5:30 in Cape Tech. Finally, girls ice hockey is 3-5-1, and their next game is this Saturday versus Bishop Stang. Congratulations to all the winning teams, and keep up the good work. The Best Buddies had a great meeting last week with the students from Ms. Freitas's and Mr. Herring's class and about 20 Best Buddies. It was a New Year's party with noisemakers, beads, and everyone sharing a favorite thing to do in the new year. Finally, students from Cape Cod Lighthouse Charter School visited our school today and were impressed by our wide range of course offerings, clubs, sports, and other enrichment opportunities. Thank you all for your time.
Hold on one second, okay? Anybody have any questions or comments for Lauren? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, recognitions. Mr. Carpenter.
I've got a few that are in your packet. First of all, the Chatham Elementary Student Council just wrote a little note to the committee wanting to thank the committee for their donations to the Pennies for Patients fundraiser that the students had. I also want to thank Leslie Schneeberger and her family for a $200 donation to the concession stand project. We'd like to thank the St. Peter's Lutheran Church for their donation of $1,250 to help homeless students at the middle school during the holidays. We also would like to thank the Art of Charity for donations that they made in December of $5,615 that allowed for a Newtonian telescope solar filter for the high school astronomy class, a purchase of classroom board games, $1,000 towards the cost of a field trip to see Richard III, $390 for the purchase of a classroom mini iPad for use in photographing, scanning, and research of middle school vernal pool and other science projects, $1,160 towards the cost of the 9th grade trip to see Romeo and Juliet, $500 guest speaker fee for Yoko Kawashima Watkins. I probably killed that name there, author of So Far from the Bamboo Grove, which is the culminating project at the end of the 6th grade, $600 for the African dance and drum troupe to perform at the high school in February, and $1,500 for the purchase of library books for the middle school. We also got a nice letter in the senior packet from the Harwich Historical Society wanting to thank our boys varsity soccer team for their support with the annual Harwich Antiques Show, and also for their help this past November for moving tables and chairs to help them with their hometown holiday fair. So thanks to the boys teams, and then I just want to just share some some other quick thanks. I want to acknowledge my favorite email of last Friday came from Mr. Brendan Burchell, who I think summed it up well. Sir, no one bats 1,000. Today's commute was one of the worst. Maybe the late start should have helped. Probably right. Although the challenge, there are those challenging days. But he also goes on to note, it says on the positive, the staff at Harwich Elementary School was great. Sidewalk plowed and cheerful, if not a bit chilly staff greeting kids when they got dropped off. And I think that little, what they described at Harwich Elementary School was happening at each one of the schools. I mean, it's one of those, I drove around to each one of the schools, and it was a tough commute, I'll admit, in hindsight. But I think it was one of those times where you see a community really step up on all the levels to go and really kind of make it work. So I'd just like to sort of thank the DPWs in both of our towns for dealing with a 1 to 3 inch band of snow that all seemed to kind of happen all at once, and it wasn't just 3 inches, and everybody for their patience on that one. So thanks to all on that. And then again, our custodians came in Sunday, and there was a lot of snow that piled up over the weekend. And again, they did a lot of work to go and get us open and ready for Monday, much to the chagrin of my own children. And now for a superintendent, I think one of the greatest joys each year is to present to the school committee and our community the choice for this year's superintendent award winner. So each year in Massachusetts, superintendents are allowed to award 1 or 2 awards in big schools, but in our case, a small high school, 1 award to the individual is called the Certificate of Academic Excellence. And the criteria that you're given is you're told the student has to be in the top 10% of their class, and then there's a lot of latitude to go and decide who amongst our Monomoy seniors represents the school and would be a good recipient of the award for academic excellence. And the nice thing is it's one of those things you can kind of reach out to the high school administration and the guidance staff and start a dialogue on who really should be this year's award winner. And having now been involved in this process for a number of years, it's always amazing just the wonders and strengths of these individuals that we get to bring here each year and really honor and celebrate. So I'd like to invite Colleen Cronin to maybe come up to the podium, and we'll go share a little bit that was written about you by Miss Police. Now, I sometimes get blamed for going on for a long time, and Ms. Police had an awful lot to say about you, and a lot of great things. She begins by saying, "It's an honor to write this letter of recommendation for Colleen Cronin, a superior candidate for the annual Superintendent's Award. While I know you read hundreds of letters similar to mine, I can assure you that Colleen is a remarkable student and even more extraordinary young woman. While I've had the opportunity to work with many gifted and talented students over the past 20-plus years in public education, a few have been as outstanding as Colleen. She is truly amazing in every way, from her superior record of academic success, her leadership, involvement in so many meaningful clubs and organizations, her talents as a gifted athlete, vocalist, and most importantly, her kindness and compassion." This goes on for another 5 pages, by the way. Colleen is truly a lifelong learner, one who's inquisitive, demonstrates enormous intellectual curiosity, exhibits near perfection in her daily work so consistently that it seems effortless. Colleen possesses an incredible work ethic that allows her to put forth superior effort even when her life has competing responsibilities, such as musical theater events, field hockey games, committee meetings, or an AP exam. Colleen never complains or makes excuses, is undeniably always prepared, and steadily meets her deadlines. Our school offers a robust program of studies, and Colleen has taken every advantage over her past 4 years, including taking every AP course available in her schedule and never receiving a grade below an A. She's currently ranked number 3 in the class, only separated by tenths of a point from the number 1 ranking. Her current GPA is only 4.99. She quite possibly will be either the valedictorian or salutatorian this year. In addition, you'll also notice that Colleen's AP scores, perfect SAT score, and transcripts are reflective of the type of ability she possesses. She's truly gifted across the curriculum, has a keen sense of political interest in political science and journalism. She was the recipient of the Monomoy Regional High School English Department Award for Excellence in Composition Literature. In addition, she was awarded the Brown University Book Award, which honors the student who best combines academic excellence with clarity in written and spoken expression. Colleen has shared with me on many occasions that her hope is to use her writing or involvement in politics to help change policy or partisan action. Colleen consistently demonstrates higher level thinking, makes incredible, insightful contributions to class, and is committed to her future in higher education. What cannot be overshadowed is Colleen's kindness and compassion towards others. She is the most genuine young woman I've ever worked with, who is truthfully has a heart of gold. She works cooperatively with all students, is incredibly patient towards others, and is an exceptional role model for young girls. Even with her challenging schedule, Colleen manages to give so much of herself to others in her community. She volunteers her time with young aspiring field hockey players each summer at the Reach Camp. She participates in volunteering with the Key Club, supports her class on countless committees. Her most impressively serves as an intern for the Harwich Town Clerk's office to assist in the preparation of the presidential election. With all of the demands in Colleen's life, she meets each day with an infectious smile and always asks, "How are you?" And she says there are more than just grades and standardized scores for Colleen. Although hers is truly impressive, she has been commended on countless occasions over the past 4 years for her leadership and academic performance. To name a few acknowledgments, Colleen was the recipient of the Rotary Youth Leadership Award, the Chatham Rotary Student of the Month, and Latin Department Award. She served as class president, is published in our local Sanskrit newspaper, and served as the 2-year treasurer for the National Honor Society. Colleen is also an esteemed vocalist and performs as the house's soprano in our most prestigious vocal ensemble, the Select Chorus. Her talents afford her the opportunity to represent in numerous times in the Southeast Music Festival and the All Cape Music Festival. And she concludes by saying that she can't speak highly enough about you. She says you're brilliant, mature, responsible, humble, and will contribute immensely. She says it's without hesitation that she fully endorses Colleen for this award, and she goes on to say that she knows that Colleen will be extremely successful at Brown University, where she's committed to be in this fall. So Colleen. Congratulations. OMG.
Oh, I know. Goosebumps.
That's unbelievable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
What, do you sleep about 2 hours a night? I'm seeing some nodding heads back there. That's great. Congratulations on behalf of the school committee. Next up, nothing quite as interesting. Reports and discussions. First of all, I'm sure it'll be very interesting, global studies proposal. How do you follow that?
I don't. My name's John Dixon. I'm a teacher at the high school, and I have been spearheading an effort to develop this Global Studies program. It's a program that's done in a number of high schools around the country, not a large number, but a number of schools. The first school to adopt this program is Providence State School in North Carolina, and that's the model we're probably most closely following, along with the program at Bremer and May School in Boston. I trust you all got copies of it, but I did print some in case you all have copies. Anyone else want a printed copy that doesn't have it? All right, so our goal is to implement this for next year and include it in the program of studies that is being finalized as we speak. This outlines the process. I don't think I need to go over all of it, but let's say there's an application process. If they're admitted, they have to complete certain core academics. They have to choose a concentration, take additional classes in that area. They choose an essential question, which would be the focus of their studies within the program. They maintain a journal or blog about their studies. They go on one of our global experiences, which we'll be developing, and they'll participate in cultural clubs and events locally, and they'll complete a senior capstone, a senior research paper together with action items and a public presentation. And they'll be helped by an advisor. There will be 2 levels. There will be a diploma, global studies diploma, and there'll be a global studies diploma with distinction if they meet a higher standard and complete higher requirements. And we are providing an opportunity for this year's juniors to participate at a somewhat lower requirement, since of course they'd only be getting into it this year, but to complete the senior capstone as well. So we're right on schedule for our plan for developing this, getting into the program of studies. There's a series of steps we need to take from here. If this plan is approved, developing applications, developing frameworks, and some other logistics about how we're going to oversee the process. We have a number of students here who have participated in the development of the process, as well as a number of faculty, and Carla Blanchard as well has been a big part of the development of this. And so at this point, I would be happy to answer any questions or defer questions to students if you have questions of them as well. Shannon?
Glancing over it without reading this thoroughly, it appears as though this is more of a sort of AP class, because you have to take these things and then it looks like maybe AP classes. Is that correct?
So AP class is not required for the standard diploma. To do the diploma with distinction, at least one AP class would be required, but it's not required to complete the program. And it's of course it's a 2 or 3 year process that they can opt into, and they can apply for at the end of freshman or at the end of sophomore year. The main thrust of it is stuff that they'll do junior and senior year. Though some of the requirements, of course, the language classes, world history too, they'll be taking earlier. So it's something we want to be in the program of studies. We want to make 8th and 9th graders aware of, and then beginning either the end of their freshman or sophomore year, they're able to apply to become part of the program.
My statement would be that I think this is fabulous. Before we regionalize, Chad was looking at international baccalaureate. And so I really think, as we're coming into, or as we are into the global era, this is fabulous. It will help set us apart from some other schools, but also give kids an opportunity to do some things that might be extra exciting to them. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Ryder.
In the global experiences section, you talk about students being required to participate in at least one global service field trip. Can you give a little more information about that? How long would a field trip be? How many would there be in 1 year? And where would they be to?
So we looked into the possibility of trying to do a pilot trip this year, and the logistics of pulling it off, trying to start organizing in September and October proved a little bit daunting. But we've been in touch with the Educational Service Tours, PF Tours, I think it is in Cambridge, that does a number of the trips for the school, and working with them on proposals for how to do this starting next year. Our goal would be to do one of these trips a year. The idea is either their sophomore, junior, senior year, they would do one of them, hopefully, perhaps we even get to do more than one. One we might look to learn from is the program that NASA does, where they have a trip to Haiti every year, and that might be something we look to learn from and perhaps even partner on for a first year, so we learn more, the ropes of how these programs are done. Providence Day, Bremer and May, other schools all have this as part of it, and so there's certainly people to learn from in terms of how best to what are the right organizations to work with. There's a lot of organizations that do international service trips, but which are the ones that these schools have had good experiences with that are going to make sense to work with. So that's something we'll be working on this spring to do for next year. It would be a week-long trip. I believe it would be over a vacation, either February or April vacation. I'm not 100% sure that that's how it's going to work out, but that's sort of my hope. We'll know much more as we get into it. Of course, we'll be coming back to you once we have a proposal for that, because we'll, of course, need your approval before we can go forward and start making deposits on trips like that. So probably by the end of the spring, we'll be back before you about that proposal.
Just a question on the global experience funding for that.
So that's another thing we'll be working on. A goal would be to make it so students have an opportunity to raise money themselves to help pay for it, but certainly to be able to defray costs for families for whom that's a barrier. We certainly don't we don't want that to be a barrier. It can be a really exciting part of a program like this to actually get overseas and experience another culture and do service work. But we are certainly committed to making sure that is not a barrier in any way to someone to participate in the program.
Thank you. Exciting.
Anybody else? Nancy, Scott.
It's waiting for you to remember my name.
On vacation, you know.
It's been a long time. What would be the advantage for students that earn the Global Studies diploma or the one with distinction?
I think there's a number of advantages. I think the process of going through it is going to help, broaden their horizons, give them a chance to focus on something and learn about something of their interest in detail that for a lot of people you can't do till you get to college. A serious research paper to complete as part of their senior year will be excellent preparation for the work they'll be doing in college, and that's something that not every high school student gets to do. For a lot of students, when they get that first college paper, that's a new experience, and for that to not be a first experience when they're doing that in college is a big advantage. And I think certainly any opportunity we have to broaden our students' horizons is worthwhile and is very beneficial to the kids. We have been very, as you can see, I have no idea this many kids would show up to support this, but that there's a lot of strong interest among the students in the program. I can't say for sure how many kids how many applications we'll get this spring, but I think it's going to be significant.
Ms. Ryder.
Based on when the students complete an application, it looks as if this would be a 2 or 3 year program. So the essential question would be developed at the beginning?
Yeah, it would be revised along the way. So they certainly, the idea is to go into it with, okay, I'm interested in climate change, I'm interested in nuclear power, I'm interested in genocide, or something that they have an initial interest in that helps focus what classes they're going to take, what they're going to write blog entries about, and to lead up to that research paper senior year. It certainly can be revised along the way. They may change their mind partly about what they're most interested in. That to give some focus, and that's based on a project-based learning model that particularly Deb Donovan is, and Carla Blanchard knows a lot about those programs well, but Deb Donovan has been trained in I forget, the DIU program. That's what we're basing a lot of that off of.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Now, I believe our hope is to actually get a motion of support from the board that allows us to go forward. Is that?
We usually get a presentation and we vote on our next meeting. But
you vote your
if
next.
you want to get underway, I don't see any problem with that.
That would certainly, I would defer to your procedure. That would be preferable. We have a number of steps we'd like to take, and we could keep going, but we were hoping to have official stamp of approval before we keep going.
Anybody like to make a motion?
I would move that the school committee wholeheartedly adopts the proposed Global Studies program to be planned, initiated, and launched during the spring for next year.
I second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next item is the,
Chairman,
Ms. Richardson.
Is there any way to stop the cold air that is blowing down at the table?
It's over here too.
Okay.
I'm okay with
Before we approve the custodian's contract.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, actually. We're working on that, I'm told. Mass Association of Regional Schools Legal Fund. Mr. Carpenter.
So in your packet is just a letter from the Mass Association of Regional Schools. Their board met recently and voted to encourage and request that regional school districts would contribute $500 to a legal fund to challenge 9C cuts that are happening on Beacon Hill. So in order for us to go and provide funding to support challenging these 9C cuts, it would have to be a vote taken by this committee to authorize us to support the legal defense.
Any questions, Mr. Duval?
Okay, this will hit our legal line on the budget. I move that we approve the expenditure of $500 to the Mass Association of Regional Schools legal fund.
Second.
Further discussion? Ms. Ryder?
In the letter that we have in front of us, it says the board is asking those regional school districts that contribute to the legal fund to affirm their position to support a Mars legal fund. They're not asking for a contribution. Is there, am I missing something somewhere else in this letter that's asking for a contribution?
I believe the second paragraph, it says to ask members to contribute $500 to the legal fund.
I think they're asking for support and $500, that way I would interpret it.
Because it
Sort of,
says,
by giving them $500, it kind of speaks for itself. Any further discussion, comments, questions for Mr. Carpenter? Motion is to approve $500. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the SEI custodial contract. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we met in an executive session to discuss the custodians contract. Mr. DePaul,
We have come to an agreement with the custodians, and the changes to their current contract, which goes back to July 1, 2016, with the exception of the first item. The first item is effective in January. Any outside work functions in the buildings, the rate will increase from $35 an hour to $40 an hour. We have agreed upon a 4%, 3%, 3% increase to the custodians' compensation. And for the lead custodians, we agreed to a 4% each year for 3 years. And then under the compensation for longevity, we have gone up $100 in each category in compensation. Going like for after 9 years from 800 to 900, after 14 years from 1,000 to 1,100, after 19 years from 1,200 to 1,300, and after 24 years of service from 1,500 to 1,600. So we also agreed to, when the employees work on holidays or on Sundays, that they would receive double time, and that would be effective July 1, 2016. And that's pretty much the changes to the contract.
so just so that we're clear, when you refer to approving this is, what you're saying is this is the recommendation of the contract subcommittee, negotiating subcommittee?
Correct. This was our presentation to the custodians in response to their initial requests.
And it's my understanding that they have, as a union, they've approved the terms of the contract?
It has been ratified by the union.
I'll entertain a motion, and we can discuss it. Is there a motion to approve the contract?
I move that we approve the contract as read by Stephen Duval.
A second?
Second.
Ms. Stowe?
I think one of the things, if anyone's watching this on TV, to mention, it does sound like a generous package, but it's after looking at the other contracts for custodians on the Cape, now it's bringing them towards what would be an average. So the percentages may seem high, but it's a very fair thing in light of that.
Very good point, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, motion to approve the contract before the school committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous. Thank you. Next up, overview of student services presentation. Ms. McGuire.
Good evening. Forgive me, I'm going to sit if you don't mind.
Please do.
Thank you. Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Not a map for Verizon, just want to make sure. Okay, I'm pleased this evening to present to you an overview of student services and other supports that are available for students. But first what I want to do, because I think it's important for the community and the committee to understand the laws in which we are required to follow in supporting students who require special education services. We have federal and state laws. The federal law is the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And under the state laws, we have, which is the old called Chapter 688 and 766 that follow the state laws. So we really are required and mandated to follow two sets of regulations and laws to support students with disabilities. There's a couple of important terms that we need to understand. One is what is called FAPE, that is a free appropriate public education. And our job is to ensure that we are reasonably calculating an educational program for students with disabilities that meet their unique individual learning needs. And that we're responsible to do this for all students who are eligible. And I'll go through the eligibility process in a minute. The next important term to understand is what's called LRB, and I know we have a lot of acronyms, so I want to make sure we always say what they are. That's the least restrictive environment. That's a really important term because our goal is always to educate our students in their home schools, their home environments, with their peers, with their neighborhood friends, and within the school to make sure that they're accessing the least restrictive environment, which is the classroom first. So that's an important term to understand, that that's where we start from for all students. So eligibility for special education services. There are several ways in which we look at identifying a student who may be eligible. First is what's called Child Find, and that's part of the regulation. That first we reach out to the community in terms of physicians and daycare centers, private schools, private preschools. And Child Find is saying if you suspect an individual has a disability, it is important that you refer them to the public school so that we can evaluate, determine whether there is a disability and whether they're eligible for special ed services. The second is what's called the pre-referral, and with pre-referral, that really speaks to our response to intervention process we have in the district in each of the schools. And that's where teams are formed and they review student progress. And that could be social, emotional, academic, or other areas that might affect a student's ability to access their learning. So through that process, they're looking at developing interventions, implementing interventions, and monitoring that progress to determine whether or not a student needs to be evaluated. The next part becomes an initial referral where a student is identified as having a suspected disability, and we evaluate in that area of suspected disability, which leads us to that evaluation. So that's the process. And then in terms of determining eligibility, through the initial evaluation, that can also be requested by parents, teachers, or related service provider. It's not requested by a doctor or by an outside provider. It has to be by the parent or an individual who understands that there is a suspected disability. Also, we're required, once a student is evaluated and determined eligible, every 3 years, we reevaluate that student to continue determining eligibility. Our job is not necessarily to have a student receive special education services their entire educational career, but to teach the level of independence and mediate skills and to close the gap so that they are able to independently access their learning. So there's a couple of possible outcomes when we're evaluating. One is the student is eligible for special education services, and an individual education program is written for that individual. And that is if they require specialized instruction or if they require related services, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. If they're not found eligible, what happens is there's a notice that is written that really describes why the student was not found eligible, because there are criteria, which I will talk about, so that the parent understands why that student did not meet the eligibility requirements. However, what we could do is we could look at, does a student require accommodations in the classroom to support their learning? We have what's called the District Curriculum Accommodation Plan, and that is a plan that all students have available to them in terms of accommodations in the classroom to support their learning. And we have a steering committee that has developed, and we'll be working on really refining that document for the district. The third thing that could happen is the student may in fact be eligible because they have a disability but don't meet the requirements for special education. They do meet the requirements for what's called the 504, and that is an accommodation plan where they are protected under civil rights, under ADA. So developing an IEP, or an individual education program, this is written by a team, and including the parent and oftentimes the student where appropriate. And the IEP has two general purposes. One is to set the reasonable learning goals for a student, and second is to state the services the student will receive to meet those goals. It's developed jointly by the parents and the student and the team of teachers and providers. And at the end of that time, when the team meets, the district is issuing an IEP based on that input from the IEP team. So some of the areas that also are addressed when we're developing an IEP is how we're going to implement and monitor. In other words, how are we going to collect data to measure the progress the student's making. We need to talk about transition planning, and that's for students 14 to 22. We have to talk about extended year services, meaning does the student require additional services after the school year during the summer because they are going to regress significantly. So that meaning when they come back from summer vacation, we expect all students to have a level of regression, meaning they forgot some things when they left school. And it takes a couple of weeks for them to recoup those skills that they may have lost. For a student with special needs, perhaps it takes far longer than their typical peers to recoup those skills. So they might need a summer program to maintain those skills. We also look at discipline and placement. We look at 688 referral, which is for adult services at the age of 18. We make sure that we identify an adult service agency that the student will transition to receive their supports. And finally, not finally, in conjunction with parental involvement, making sure that we continually involve parents in the process and in the student's program. So the other piece that's important to understand is there is a problem resolution system. At times this is difficult for families, it's difficult for the students, and the state has put in measures to ensure that there are opportunities for parents in this district to follow a problem resolution cycle. The first thing is what's called PQA, it's Program Quality Assurance, and that is the state compliance system. That if you feel that a child's IEP is not being implemented, this is a place you could go and seek support to have that checked by the state. You can have what's called facilitated meetings. This is really relatively new in the systems. It's a few years out where they receive some grant funding because at times, and again, this can be very difficult for all parties when you're trying to do what is right for a child, and sometimes you might not agree with the supports or services that are in place. So you can have a facilitator, which is a hearing officer that has been assigned specifically to a school district that will come in and help facilitate the meeting and make sure that all parties are feeling good about the dialogue and the outcomes of the meeting. You can also seek what's called mediation, where again, it is a hearing officer, but who serves as a mediator that will come and work with the two parties to come to a mutual understanding of what the services might look like. The other program that is grant funded and is facilitated out of BC is what's called SPEDX, that is the name of it. And there's a list of consultants that you and the parent can choose from, and they will come and evaluate the program and make recommendations for the parent and the district. And I've used it a couple of times, and it's very helpful. And finally, there's the Bureau of Special Ed Appeals, and that's when there's legal requirement to have somebody rule on what the services for a student might be. In all of these situations, what I try to convey is that these are helpful processes. These are to help us when we might not agree, but there's another lens that comes in to help us navigate the concerns that either party has. So I feel that there are helpful options for parents and for the district. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different services and programs across the schools and grades. So starting at our preschool, we have our integrated classrooms. Our integrated classrooms have typical gears, and they have students with special needs. We have our intensive preschool program. We have Make Way for Kids, who supports students and families that are at risk. And then we have students who might come in for what's called walk-in services, who might only need speech service or occupational therapy, and they will come in for that service. At our elementary programs, schools, we have inclusion support, which means that there are students who are provided support within the general education classroom with their peers. We have academic support, where they have an opportunity to go to a class and receive additional instruction, support, whether it's pre-teaching, reteaching, support with organizational skills. And then we have our intensive services, where they might be pulled out for anywhere from 25% to 75% of the day to get individualized discrete instruction in their area of need. At the middle school, again, we have inclusion support, academic support, intensive services, and we do have an individual who provides reading services specifically at the middle school. We have reading services at all the schools, but we actually have identified an individual who provides reading support to the middle school. At the high school, they have inclusion and some co-teaching support, meaning the co-teaching is where general education and special education teacher work together to teach the content area. They have an academic support program as well, again, where students can receive that additional support to make sure that they're able to access their programs. We have intensive services where they are working on a lot of life skills and skills that are specific to their life learning, because they're not able to access the general curriculum. They do a lot of, in terms of daily living skills, independent living skills, career readiness. They do work in the community in terms of community-based learning. And then we have our post-graduation program, which is our 18 to 22. And that's predominantly a work-based learning program where students are out working, but who are also learning life skills in terms of being prepared to live beyond high school when they graduate. It is an entitlement under special education that students can receive their services up to the age of 22. And then we have our most restrictive programming, which is out of district. This is for students who have significant disabilities that we do not have the capacity or supports available to support their unique needs. And so they are referred to approved private special education schools. We have an out-of-district coordinator who oversees that and works with those programs and families to ensure the supports and services are in place. And I just wanted to show the numbers in terms of out-of-district, because I know it's an area that is not really well understood by the community and by members who might be, folks who might be watching this. And I did want to show the state data, although that's 2014-15, because it's a trailing data, but I'm impressed being new to Monomoy with the low numbers of students who are out of district, and that's really a tribute to the amazing staff here in the special education departments supporting students and really working to create programs that meet needs. So there's some other programs, and these aren't special education programs, but I think they're really important to highlight because they're absolutely programs that support students in hopefully mitigating some of the needs for them to be evaluated or end up receiving special education services. I know Mr. Wilson presented a few weeks ago on his seminar block at the middle school, and this is a great program because all students access it, but what's nice about it is there's a component that has remediation. So students who might be struggling have an opportunity to really get support in areas that they struggle in. And of course, that really helps to defer the need for a special education evaluation when we're providing that tiered instruction to support those needs. In addition, it includes interest-based enrichment. And again, this program, all students access this. So this is not just a general education program, but it's for all students. At the high school, they have an alternative learning program. And again, this is not a special education program, but students are in there and they're receiving academics, vocational skills opportunity, and credit recovery. Many of the students go in for a half day and receive academics, and then they are working the other half of the day. And this, again, is a really nice program that supports at-risk students and prevents them from potentially having to receive special education services. The other program that's new, and kudos to the high school this year, is the Academic Center, who looks at students who are at risk, who really require some support on organizational skills, some coping skills, really being able to be better prepared to access their learning. And they also have facilitated peer mentors. So these are all wonderful programs that help mitigate referral to special education. We're also very fortunate to have clinical and psychological support through 2 consultants. We have a BCBA, Dr. Art Campbell, who comes to schools and when needed, who provides functional behavior assessments, who develops behavior support plans and works with staff to implement those plans, but he also works with the family so that there's carryover of those supports in the home as well. We also have Dr. Lepuck, who will provide psychological evaluations for very unique situations that we don't have the capacity to evaluate. And he works with the team to really identify what those needs are and helps us to develop really good plans and recommendations for student supports. We also have some partnerships that provide in-school counseling through Gosnell, through Child and Family Services, and Harwich Youth and Family Services. Those have been great partnerships this year where students have access to counseling where their family is involved. And this is where we are just providing a place for counseling, but students who might not be able to access their counseling services after school for the many circumstances that families may have, they are able to access their counseling in school. Related services, and I didn't list all of them because truly there are many related services. And the related services are for unique needs. So you have your speech and language pathologist, your occupational therapist, your audiologist, physical therapist. You have structured reading or reading specialists that address significant reading deficits. You have counseling, you have interpreting and translation, and it keeps going. You have orientation and mobility for students who may have visual impairments. You have, and I can't see that, social workers. Transportation is a related service, meaning if a student is not able to access the regular bus to get to school because they have a unique need that requires specialized transportation, that's a related service and identified as part of their disability. We have a teacher of the visual impairments that supports several of our students in the district. We have parent counseling and training, augmentative communication, meaning when a student might need an adaptive device or some type of computer device to speak for them, we make sure we have that accessible for them. And our parent professional support. So as you can see, related services is a very large part of the services and supports that we have for students or students need. We have our English language learner program. Each school has a teacher to support English language learners. They have access to 3 different levels of classes which they are taught to proficiency. There's a resource class which provides additional help in core subjects. And the teachers provide support to students in the general education classroom and consult with teachers to ensure the greatest level of success. We're also very fortunate to have a great deal of community resources that support our students in our schools. We have school resource officers. We have the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative that our children access, and that was legislation, if you're not familiar, many years ago through Mass Health for students to be able to access wraparound students because we have seen such an incline in mental health and behavioral health issues that there's these community partnerships now. So the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative is one of the ways we support families to access treatment and supports in the community. We also access the mobile crisis team, which is part of the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative. So if a child is in crisis and has Medicaid as their insurance, and they're in crisis, they do have a team that will come out and evaluate. And if the child needs additional support, they can also make sure that they get to the hospital for treatment. Again, I just reiterated here our support through Gosnold and Chatham and Harwich. We also work with the Keep Them Coming program. If you're not familiar with that, that's through the DA's office, where they look at truancy, and of course, if a child is not in school, they're not learning. So we want them here. So one of the ways we access this program is first is make sure that parents are aware of the number of absences and are concerned for the student being absent and the importance of them being in school. And if they continue to be absent, we will check in with the DA's office, and they'll come and they'll meet with families, and they'll meet with the student, and they'll provide supports and ways in which they can help them ensure their students are in school. And if that doesn't work, we do have other options to get support through the courts, which is a child receiving assistance, a CRA, so that the family can get further support if necessary. So moving on to another part of student services, and I talked about it briefly before, but we do have students who are eligible for what's called Section 504, which is part of the Rehabilitation Act. And again, it's interesting because they've never changed the terminology in legislation, and it's an issue for me, I know. It's in there, but I put it in red because handicap is still a term that is in the law. So I kind of put disability there because I certainly, I'd like to change the handicap to that. But so anybody is actually entitled to a 504 who is part of a public school program, meaning it's not just students. Certainly staff, teachers, parents who access our buildings are protected under ADA and under 504. And again, this is for students, if we're talking about students only, who need accommodations to be able to access their learning, and that the teacher is able to provide those accommodations. So it's really, what it looked at is leveling the playing field, and it was to eliminate impediments to full participation for individuals with disabilities. So it's really intended to prevent discrimination, meaning that students couldn't participate, and this was way back when, it doesn't happen now because we've certainly evolved and become really, really good at understanding student needs, but people have been not included in certain areas because of maybe a disability, because they couldn't access it. And I'll give you an example because it's one of my favorite. A student with significant disabilities and could never be left alone, but he could ski. And although that's not a special education program, there was a ski club, and he wanted to ski. Now, when I lived down here, we had a ski club. I don't know if there's ski clubs anymore, but we had to travel far from July to go ski somewhere. So he needed to be on the ski team, and he needed support to do that. And he did have the support, but when he hit the bottom of the mountain, he didn't know where he was, couldn't get into the lodge, and he needed somebody there. And it's a great example of the kinds of support that if this wasn't in place, he would have never been able to be part of that ski club. So there are key questions that we have for anyone that requires either special education or here it would be a 504, but does the student have a disability? And one of the things I'd like to make sure is understood is diagnosis doesn't mean disability, doesn't equal disability. So what I mean by that is because someone has a diagnosis of anything, it could be ADHD, it could be cancer, it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a disability. A disability is such that it excludes you from participating in anything in a public setting that your peers have access to. And sometimes that's a difficult concept to understand. So we have to ask the question is, do they have a disability? And is the student being excluded? Meaning, can they not access an activity that all of their peers are accessing? And do they need reasonable accommodations in order to be included or gain access to all environments? So those are the questions we ask, and then we put a plan in place to make sure that they can access those environments. So all of this requires coordination, And so in each of the buildings, we have what is called the team chair, and the team chair is required actually by regulation. It doesn't have to be called the team chair, but an individual has to be able to commit resources on behalf of the district when developing and proposing either IEP, an individual education program, or a 504. Currently, the school psychologists serve as a team chair in 3 of the buildings, with the exception of Howard Elementary, where our out-of-district coordinator serves as the team chair. This is a lofty list, and I'm proud, and clearly I'm not the one that has any say in what happened here. It's to the great work that's been done in the district prior to me. I'm not going to read all of these. Hopefully people can glean that there's a really nice list of accomplishments here. Challenges, there's also an equal number of challenges. And the challenges aren't because we don't have amazingly talented staff. It's based on resources, and that's, as you know, that everything's based on resources. But the challenges are unique in special education because of the number of mandates and laws that we are required to follow to support students with disabilities. Rightfully so, and that's, not the issue. The issue is more about, the lack of resources in this area to provide those services that are needed. Some of the types of disabilities that we are seeing are very unique in terms of there's not necessarily a cohort of students that require the same type of programming or support, and it makes it very difficult to provide the unique support students might have. There's very few options for students who may require an out-of-district program. Very few options where students don't have to travel over the bridge to get the supports that they need. So that's certainly a challenge for us as well. The increase in psychiatric, mental health, social, emotional, behavioral challenges is daunting. And of course, the opioids, all of these issues that we face every day, and try to figure out ways to best serve students who need them. But one of the biggest things, and I put in red, and again, I know you've read this, but it's the unpredictability. The unpredictability of first of all, having a student have a disability and being able to provide a service, but the unpredictability comes with also students who might move to our community, and we welcome them, but being able to make sure we can provide those services. Certainly school choice, there's unpredictability with students who might be choicing here who require services. There's a whole host of unpredictability-ness, is that a word? That comes along with special education, and we always have to each day kind of look to see what those challenges might be and brainstorm how we can best service our students. So that's the end of what I hope was brief. I apologize, I know the report was quite lengthy, but I hope it was informative, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Ms. Ryder.
Thank you, that was a great presentation. I had a question about something in the beginning, just your opinion. The reevaluation that you conduct every 3 years, what do you think of that time frame? Do you think that's too often, not often enough? I'm just curious.
So, 2 things with that. First, it's regulation. So second of all, you can waive it. So there are times when we have enough information. We clearly understand the student have enough information. We work with the parent, and you can request what's called a waiver, so that you don't necessarily need to first of all, putting a student through evaluation is very laborious. It's hard on them, and it takes them out of something to have it. So we don't have to if the team agrees that we can waive it. Usually when the types of testing you're looking at, it's not the actual testing itself, because that's a snapshot in time. And once we have information on a student, that testing information doesn't change a whole lot because they're standardized tests. So it's really what we're looking at is the current performance and the observations and the data that we have collected on their performance, their goals, that is more critical in my mind. But the evaluation tool is very helpful because it drives our ability to develop goals and look at the areas that have most need, and constantly revamp those goals as we develop new educational programs each year.
Do you find that a 3-year period is often enough, or are you to some extent, continuously adapting as, as time goes on, just as the people that are involved with the students see that changes need to be made. Is that?
The IEP is reviewed annually. So you're looking at data annually, and more often if needed. There are often times that we may meet several times on an individual in a year, looking at the data. We may need to revise the IEP because a lot of times they may meet the goals. And we need to, we need to increase the level of expectation in the goals. So we'll need to change the IEP and propose a new one. So it's annually reviewed. It's just evaluation in terms of, that's more for eligibility, because evaluation is in response to needing to find a student eligible. And the reason they do that is so that you're not necessarily keeping a student on an IEP unnecessarily too. So that you want to determine eligibility every 3 years. And again, if you find that the student is making such significant progress they don't require specialized services, then you can meet and terminate that as well.
Thank you. And you made a distinction that I wasn't understanding, so thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Richardson?
These two items may be totally unrelated, but I was just wondering if there was a connection or a disconnect. How do the services that you just presented translate into the number of students that we had that did not graduate in this previous year?
So
are they connected at all, or?
And that's a whole different conversation, but I can tell you for some of those students that were in that cohort that didn't graduate are part of the post-graduation program, which is the 18 to 22.
Yes.
And unfortunately, what happens for those students is they are counted in the graduating class, even though they may be with us another 4 years. And so I think there's probably a little bit of misunderstanding with what that looks like for those students because of how they reported with what would have been a graduating class, but they continue to receive services for 4 years.
So what I needed for clarification. And just one other question. Why is there an out-of-district person for the team chair in Harwich Elementary School?
Because we don't have the resources for a team chair
Is
in
that
the
a
school.
separate person, like outside of the district, that's on a per diem basis?
Oh, no, she's a full-time staff with the district, but she happens to have a title of out-of-district coordinator, so she supports our 15, I'm saying off the top of my head, I think it's 15 students who are out of district, meaning she chairs all of the team meetings at the private special education schools. She coordinates the reevaluations that we talked about for re-eligibility and continued services. She observes those students in those private schools, but she also is at Harwich Elementary doing that same job, team chairing at Harwich Elementary.
Any other questions? Mr. Russ?
Just a comment, thanks, Melissa. I echo Karen's. It gives those who are watching at home, but also the members of the committee, a fresh look at just how much, not only the expanse of our special needs services throughout this district, but the depth and how much we can appreciate not only the individual staff members that respond to this, but the overwhelming amount of detail that's needed as we guide these needy kids from 5 years old up through 22. So it's an awesome task. I appreciate your clarity you brought to me watching this again.
Anybody else? I have a question. The BCBA coordinator? Is it?
BSEA or the?
No, BCBA.
Oh, Board Certified Behavior Analyst.
What's that for?
That's for students who engage in challenging behaviors. Typically, either it's a behavioral, emotional, could be a psychiatric issue, but have serious challenging behaviors, whether it's aggression, whether it's non-compliance, whether it's school avoidance. And he is the board certified behavior analyst is someone who is able to go in and really analyze what's the function of the behavior. And is that function related to disability? Is it not? And how can we put a plan in place to make sure that they're learning the skills that they need to in order to kind of mitigate some of those challenging behaviors, and to really decrease that and replace it with pro-social skills.
Could that sometimes involve students who are not otherwise, don't otherwise have an IEP or
Absolutely.
a 504
Absolutely,
qualifying student?
absolutely.
How much of an issue is that? I know you're new to the system, but from what you've heard so far, how much of that is an issue for our system compared to others, for example? I just become concerned sometimes about whether students might be disruptive, but they're not, because they're not in any kind of program, they're not having regular, contact with specialists. And I just wonder to what extent that becomes a problem.
In the short time I've been here, I don't see it in terms of students outside of receiving special education services are requiring a lot of outside expertise. We have a pretty talented clinical staff in terms of our psychologists and adjustment counselors and guidance counselors, very talented in understanding the principles of applied behavior analysis, which is what a BCBA is really, a master in. So I don't see it as a huge problem. I certainly can compare it. I had 2 full-time clinical coordinators in Shrewsbury who were BCBAs, and an additional 4 BCBAs in the schools. And that works closely with general education and special education. So I'm impressed, in all honesty, with the level of work that is being done. And it's nice to have another lens come in and support a team, especially when they're struggling with what do we do, how can we help this student? So it's really helpful to have that extra lens and expertise supporting the teams.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very informative. Next up, fiscal 2018 budget discussion timeline. Mr. Carpenter. Ms. Izernio.
So to do a quick dovetail when it comes to special education, in my former district, we would have, as part of a budget conversation every year, special education had its own little piece of that budget conversation because it was such a huge driver of the budget. And it's not that special education isn't a driver in this budget, but it's all sort of relative. In Melissa's presentation, she talks about 15 out-of-district students that we have. My former district, slightly smaller in size, not much, nearly 60 out-of-district students. So you can imagine how much of a budget driver that is. At our next meeting, I'm going to have Melissa just give you some insights into what the special education budget looks like, but we don't have special education specifically broken out in this budget presentation. The other thing I just want to share with the committee is just sort of an overview of what goes on to sort of get to the budget that you have before you. I mean, we're lucky. Katie and I have a really great team to go and initially bounce ideas off. So Katie and I meet with each of the administrators and the principals to go and really hone in on what are our needs. Where do we want to go? We look at the strategic plan and school improvement plans and say, okay, how do we move this district forward? We also have a lot of meetings that go on monthly, and as we get into sort of the New Year's crunch, getting ready for this meeting, reaching out and triangulating with our town managers and finance directors. So Katie and I have had a number of phone calls and meetings because it's really important that when we're coming here to do a budget presentation, that it's meeting our needs, but it also sits nicely into our town's fiscal wherewithal and their ability to go and fund it, and that we're not having a budget presentation that's completely out of sync with what the town's ability to fund it. So where we are with this, I sent something out to, to our staff, and I said the good news is I'm making a budget presentation tonight. It's a level service or level staff budget that actually has us funding some of the initiatives that we hope to be moving forward, like the middle school one-to-one initiative with Chromebooks is in here. It's part of this budget. Making sure we have the new physics textbooks for the ninth grade physics first initiative that we've rolled out. We've got physics textbooks. We've got the consumables for math and focus. All of that stuff is in here. And there's also some things that we wanted to kind of get to. We talked at our past school committee meeting about must-haves, the contractual obligations, things that we need to have, like math and focus workbooks for this math and focus program that we've rolled out, and then things we'd like to get to, like potentially getting an extra school bus to help with ride check times, or potentially adding a BIPS coordinator. The reality is, neither town has the fiscal wherewithal, and we've kind of reached out to them to go and fund all of it. But what we've done here is put together something that I think will get us to where we need to be. And I think the positive thing that I sent out to the staff today is that usually in January, sort of foreshadowing to people and saying, okay, my experience is that budgets look better in May than they do in January. And the really good thing for us this year is this is a really good news budget. When we really get into it, it's a good news budget. And if things look better in May than they do in January, I think it bodes well for the schools and things we want to move forward. Tomorrow, by our regional agreement, we are supposed to drop off the budget, which is sort of like all of the numbers, delivered to the towns, delivered to the libraries. We also would then take the budget presentations from my recommendation to the committee, working with our finance subcommittee. This would go in tandem with the budget information to the town managers, to the libraries, as sort of our sort of public statement on here's the funds that we need to run the district. The presentation, I will skim through this. I will spare all of you 45 pages of slides. So there's some things we'll skim through. I wanted to make sure that all of the information is there for transparency's sake. Over the last 3 years, we've heard different members of finance committees or selected and asked questions. We've tried to make sure that every bit of information that people have wanted in past years, it's there. You want to know about foundation enrollment trends over the last several years? It's there. You want to look at our school choice accounts, or access and deficiency, or circuit breaker? It's there. And so it's probably more information than anyone truly needs to digest. So we'll try to kind of move through and share some of the highlights.
Just before you do, you mentioned that it's going to be in the library and handed out to the town administrators. Just so that people who are watching will be aware, it will also be available on our website.
It will too, yes. So I sort of start by just sort of indicating, but we're never just looking at FY18. This budget is looking at past years, it's looking at the present, and it's looking forward. Foundation enrollment. At the end of the day, the basis of your budget is how many students do you have, and so the foundation enrollment is the blue line. So we've got Harwich's number of kids in Harwich, number of kids in Chatham over time. You'll notice that line is running roughly flat. It's actually ticking up ever so slightly. So our foundation enrollment is holding steady. So this is foundation enrollment is the number of students living or number of children living in Chatham and Harwich that attend public schools, because those are the ones we're financially responsible for. Okay, looking back at the FY17 budget, this is something we need to kind of do first. One of the things that's important to note is we had a math error when we were putting together the assessment sheet for FY17 for our towns. We are actually, in the vote that the school committee made, we are at the moment on paper overly assessing Chatham by $26,749, and ideally we need to go and have a revote to go and address that. The other thing that's important to understand looking at FY17, the present year's budget, is that the governor's numbers when they came in almost $500,000 more favorable with Chapter 78, and that plays actually a big factor in how we look at FY18. So money that would be available can get rolled into supporting an FY18 budget. And the other factor that's in the FY17 number that has a significant impact on this budget is something called the minimum required contribution. So Harwich and Chatham both have a minimum required contribution that the state determines based on both factors of the towns. That minimum required contribution impacts what each town's assessment is, and that changed significantly, primarily for Chatham in FY17, which then impacts the FY18 budget. In terms of the revote that would need to happen with regard to Chatham's assessment or the assessment for the district, it doesn't change Harwich's assessment, but there's a math error that we indicate on the assessment sheet as you go through where the initial operating assessment for Chatham was $7,810,242 and should be $7,783,493. That accounts for that $26,749 difference. So we could either have a vote tonight to change the assessment, or we could do that later. We'll leave that to the chair.
I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Vall. I move that we change the assessment to the town of Chatham from $7,810,242 to $7,783,493 to cover the overassessment of $26,749
For fiscal 2017.
for fiscal 2017.
And that's in the operating assessment, and then
Right.
on the slide that's up now, the total bottom line would make Chatham's new bottom line assessment is $8,632,592.
That's part of your motion.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous. Thank you.
All right. Chapter 70 funding. This Chapter 70 is the state aid that districts get. The state has a formula to ensure that children are provided an adequate funding for education. There's a minimum required contribution there that is determined by municipal wealth factors. Half of it's based on property values within a community, half of it's based on personal income within a community. And as I said, as the state budget went through, the property values in the past year in Chatham and the wealth factors in Chatham have increased significantly. So on the state level, they have, through the Department of Revenue, looked at it and said, okay, Chatham is able to pay more for its schools, therefore there's less state aid that would come in. So as I said, that will play into this. The other thing that other people need to understand is that we have this kind of annual challenge. We are talking about budgets, and there's a significant chunk of the Monomoy budget that is determined by state aid. But that isn't finalized until the governor signs the budget after it passes through all the channels of Beacon Hill. Last year, that happened at the beginning of July. Town meetings, when our budget gets finalized, are in May, so you end up having this 2-month disconnect that sometimes then impacts how you can use the funds. So we do have a significant amount of aid that came in through the governor's FY17 numbers that will be rolling into our excess and deficiency account, but we can then use that to offset the future fiscal years. So behind each of our budgets over the last years, we have an assumption that state aid will be the same as it was the prior year. So we're assuming that state aid is going to at least be level. If you look at the blue line, you'll notice that state aid from FY13 through FY17 has gradually increased, and it's increasing at the same rate. And you never really know if it will continue to increase, or when will it level off, or will it get cut. So there's a presumption behind this budget, and it's a big one, that state aid will at least be where the blue triangle is up here, so that it will be even with where it was in FY17. If it comes in and we have the governor sign a budget in July again, and it comes in higher, windfall for us, but it's an amount of money that potentially rolls into excess and deficiency. We have to hope that it doesn't come in lower than the blue triangle. If that happens, then we start talking about programs that don't happen that are included in this budget because the funding would be there. Minimum required contribution trends for the two towns. You'll notice here that the minimum required contribution for both towns is increasing ever so slightly, and that happens each year as you have a municipal growth factor in that overall budget equation. In terms of the draft FY18 budget, we really tried to have this budget find it and fit nicely within our strategic plan and the things that we want to see the district move forward. But we're sensitive to the class size guidelines that we've been talking about for the last 3 budget cycles. And the other major factor here is to make sure that our budget that we're presenting fits nicely within the wherewithal of our two towns. Our district enrollment. If you look at the children who are attending our schools, 65% of the children attending our schools here in the district come from Harwich, 23% from Chatham, and 12% from school choice students that live in other towns that choice into the district that we get tuition for them. This is sort of the group of students who attend our schools. This is different than foundation enrollment because the foundation enrollment is looking at the number of students that live in Chatham and Harwich but attend public schools anywhere. So if you look at foundation enrollment, that would include students who live in Harwich or Chatham that go to Lighthouse Charter School, or go to Sturgis, or go to Dennis Yarmouth, or go to Sturgis or go to Nauset through school choice. The tech school would not be included in our foundation enrollment because the tech school is the one that is fiscally responsible for them. So the tech school does a separate assessment to the town. The 3-year rolling average, our budget is based on looking at enrollment, foundation enrollment in the two communities over the last 3 years to help smooth any spike in any particular year. When I first started at Monomoy, the big fear in Harwich was that Chatham's enrollment was going to keep going down, and Harwich's enrollment was going to keep going up, and sooner or later Harwich is going to be paying almost everything. And we saw that a decline in Chatham as we went to FY14, FY15, and it started to level off in FY16, leveled a little bit more in FY17. In FY18, we're actually seeing for the first time it's shifting the other direction, that the The enrollment is now shifting slightly towards Harwich, and the funding for the district, or slightly towards Chatham, and the funding for the district is now shifting ever so slightly towards Chatham. So, good news for, Harwich, and good news actually for, I think, the families in Chatham, who I think are always wondering, it's like, how do we get more families in our community? Well, we're seeing more families staying here. So enrollment trends versus foundation enrollment. And we talked about this towards the beginning of the year. Our foundation enrollment's ticking up a little bit. We noticed we saw some loss of some students at the middle school in the past year that they created a slight downward tick for the past fiscal year in our enrollment within the district. If we look at Chatham enrollment versus Harwich enrollment versus school choice enrollment, the proportions of each of those over the last several years have stayed fairly consistent. A slight, again, downtick in school choice relative to the other groups in the FY17. Average class sizes, we strive to go and have our class sizes at the elementary school to be close to 18. We strive to have our class sizes at the middle school and high school to be close to 19. Within each one of those schools, the averages do fall into those plus or minus one scenarios, and you'll have certain classes here or there that are a little higher, and other ones that are lower. You see that we would project that we'd see that same sort of distribution as we look into the FY18 class sizes that would be behind this budget. Budget assumptions. We're projecting that we'll see level enrollment. The cohort that we currently see in the kindergarten preschool grade levels is roughly the size of the cohort that we're seeing ready to graduate and head out of our doors at the high school. This is it's a level. The presumption is that we have level staffing. Our staffing are advancing on their steps and lanes. The big assumption here is that state aid is going to be the same, that the minimum required contributions aren't going to shift further. We presume that our school choice funding, our circuit breaker funding will be level with FY17. Huge driver in this budget, and a big assumption. We're presuming, and the TVs have been saying that health insurance for active employees is likely to go up 15%, and that for retirees 10%. If the insurance comes in more favorably than that, that could be a place that we could potentially see a way to fund some things that we otherwise can't in this budget. At the moment, the town of Chatham is carrying 15%, 10% for their insurance numbers. Harwich, when I've talked to the Harwich town manager, he is thinking that maybe the tea leaves may be favoring that active employee increase might be closer to 12. Again, we're trying. This is a presentation we have to go and bring to both towns and have to go and provide a number that reflects the most conservative estimate out there. As I said, the enrollment shift has the ratio behind our budget shifting ever so slightly towards Chatham. And lastly, there is again a contribution within this budget towards OPEB, the outstanding post-employment benefits of $100,000, the same as it was in FY17. In terms of excess and deficiency, this budget finds $333,000 being used of excess and deficiency to offset the FY18 budget. A good question that I've been asked by a number of the school committee members is, well, what's the certified amount of excess and deficiency for this year? We don't know that yet. We should be getting it soon. What happens is that at the end of a fiscal year, so last year was FY16, it's closed out, but we're waiting to get that excess and deficiency balance certified. So the current balance is $635,794. We anticipate that after the excess and deficiency is certified, that number will go up a little bit. We'll take $333,326 from that amount to help offset the FY18 budget. That's significantly more excess and deficiency than we were using in our 5-year plan. The reason we're using more than what was in the 5-year plan when we thought about gradually growing excess and deficiencies is that because of the windfall that we saw with the governor's numbers and the additional Chapter 70 aid, we will have the money there that we can use to help offset FY18's budget. So there's a lag time between when you have the funds certified and when they're available, but we know we're going to have the funding there to help offset this upcoming year's budget more than we've been able to offset in some cases past budgets. The school choice account, we see or anticipate about $1.5 million in school choice revenue. We take an equivalent amount of $1.5 million of school choice money, and we use that to support staffing within this budget, so that it's an even exchange of funds there. Circuit breaker is money that comes in from the state to offset the cost of expensive special education tuitions. We have a balance in that circuit breaker account. You can carry money for 2 years within circuit breakers, so we are anticipating $331,000 of circuit breaker money coming in, and using just over $277,000 of that to offset the budget. It would still leave us with a little over $450,000 in that circuit breaker reserve. And again, it's a reserve that you want to carry. You don't know at any given time a child with extreme special needs could move into the district, and all it takes is one child with extreme needs to have needs that need to be funded, and there needs to be a way to go and fund those within your reserves. Our tuitions, school choice tuitions, the district has been paying in past budget years over $1 million for school choice. We're anticipating that our school choice that we're paying out for students living in Chatham and Harwich going to other districts is going to be equivalent to FY17. You'll notice that it dropped off from FY16. That amount went down. Good news for us. And the charter school tuitions had ticked down ever so slightly. The assumption behind this budget is that number is going to maintain even with FY17. Our budget drivers. This is, the next 3 slides are sort of a different way of describing the conversation we had previously at the school committee meeting. This is our must-have slide. Because these are the things that we're contractually obligated to provide. There are some special education tuitions that weren't in FY17 that are in the FY18 budget. We know that our busing contract has ticked up just slightly. We know that we have our staff, our contracts with our teachers and our custodians and our technicians all have increases. That's in here. We have the health insurance increases, and we have the leases of things that we engaged in this year, including the Mac Lab, off of the library here, and the hyper-convergence system that that we are using to replace our servers in the district. There's also the set of things that we referred to in previous conversations as needs. Now, these are initiatives that are moving forward and want to make sure happen in this year. This includes the consumables for the Math and Focus program, the textbooks that we're currently piloting but haven't paid for in this new Physics First initiative and our new 8th grade oceanography curriculum to fund those books, to have a stipend for the TV studio manager, and then the last one there is this, to have that one-on-one initiative move forward with the school district funding the computers for the middle schoolers, or the Chromebooks for the middle schoolers. The last slide is the column in our previous conversation about our wants. These are improvements that we were hoping would be incorporated into the draft FY18 budget. At the moment, where the town's fiscal wherewithals are, we would be able within this budget, and this budget sort of put together, that we can get that bus. We can pick up an additional bus. So the other things that we hoped to see move forward, I've lined out. They aren't included in the budget numbers as this budget plays out, and in the document, the numbers that you have. But the caveat that I want to share with you, and I think the hope is, if health insurance does break more favorably, we can pick up some of these improvements. So a 1% change in health insurance has the potential to be about a $40,000 swing cost-wise for the district. So there is the possibility that all it takes is a 1.5% shift in what that health insurance contribution is, and we could potentially be talking about how would we go and move forward a volunteers in public schools program within the district. So the FY18 budget in its great detail. At the end of the day, the budget is a $230,625 is the bottom line number for this budget. As you go through this presentation, anytime that number shows up, it's highlighted in a yellow box, so it ties in throughout. How the school funding is used, 68% of our budget goes to personnel costs, the salaries and benefits for our staff. You see then the next big pieces in our budget. Debt service, just the paying for the debt of the new high school, that's 6%. 5% of our budget are tuitions, the tuitions to charter schools and school choice. 5% of our budget's paying for the facilities, the upkeep and of our buildings, and to have the lights on, and yes, in fact, Donna, to occasionally have heat
instead of cold.
Once we had it.
So, in terms of how a budget's funded, 85% of the school district's budget comes from the local property taxes coming in from our towns. Only 8% of the budget comes from the state. And you'll notice that in this year's budget, 1% of this budget is coming from excess and deficiency that we're using to help offset the cost of this budget. You'll see 4% of the budget comes from tuition that those students that come from other towns that attend Monomoy, they bring tuition dollars here. And we also, as a regional school district, get some transportation aid that helps offset the cost of the buses. That's about 1% of the total budget in terms of how it gets funded. a slide we put together last year, just what does it cost to educate a student each day at Monomoy. It all breaks down in a budget. It costs $112.02 to educate a child at Monomoy. Of that $112.02, $76.36 of it are personnel costs.
Mr. Carpenter, so if a taxpayer asks us what the annual cost is, that would be multiplied by 180, not 300.
Multiply that by 180 days the students go to school.
Okay.
And then multiply that by the total number of students we have in the district, and presto, you get back to that magic number in yellow. So just how our budget sits line by line, we break out the budget by all the different categories that we ultimately voted by. We also then have collapsed some of those to salaries and wages, expenses, fixed charges, programs with other districts, and the capital and debt. If we look at how those categories, or what percent of the budget are each of those categories, salary and wages, 52.8%, expenses, 13.8%, fixed charges, fixed charges being those contracts that we've engaged in, or things that you have to pay for, 18.6%, capital and debt, almost 7%, and programs with other districts, 7.8%. Increases over the prior fiscal year. Bottom line, our budget is going up by 5.16%. If you look at all of the lines within the budget, the assessment does not go up by that amount, and we'll kind of get into that. And as I mentioned, it's a level staffing budget. We should see the same number of staff at the end of this budgeting process. The staff may shift slightly between categories depending on, if we have conversations along the lines that it's possible that maybe we need no special education teacher, but we can afford to have one less teaching assistant. So there might be some slight shifts as we have more and more clarity as to individual needs, and particularly on the student services front of a budget. So moving from a budget to an assessment, our $38 million budget doesn't cost the town $38 million. The assessment is the bill ultimately that the school district gives to Harwich and Chatham to fund the education of the children in the towns. The assessment's based on our regional agreement, a formula within the regional agreement. The state aid we anticipate to help offset the costs to run the schools from the aid coming from the state is just slightly over $3 million. We also get money from the state in terms of circuit breaker for special education placements. We get that transportation allotment from the state, and we also see a small, almost negligible amount of money from the state to offset expensive charter school tuitions. Each town has a required minimum contribution that is determined based on wealth factors, and it's based on a 3-year rolling average of enrollment. The assessment drivers this year, as I mentioned before, there's a slight increase in the 3-year rolling average towards Chatham. There's a significant increase in the minimum required contribution for Chatham compared to Harwich. So Harwich's minimum required contribution went up in from FY 17 to 18 by $3,500 total. Chatham's went up by $118,415. That has a significant impact on the bottom line assessment for Chatham. So when we get to the FY18 assessment sheet and get down to the bottom rows of that, Chatham's assessment for Operation for the operation, transportation, and capital is going up 5.63%. Harwich's assessment is going up just over 3.5. It's 3.58% is what Harwich's bottom line assessment is going up. Chatham's would be virtually identical to Harwich's had it not been for that shift in minimum required contribution. So that $118,000 that Chatham is required by the state to contribute towards the funding of the education before the assessment gets calculated, really it is causing that shift between those two numbers. And then the total assessment now is slightly less than that because we now are paying down the debt on the new school. So because the debt keeps going down each year, the total assessment for Harwich ends up, with the debt included, at a 3.03% increase over their spending in FY17. Chatham's assessment goes up 5.01% over their spending on the schools in FY17. Again, the difference there driven by the increase in the minimum required contribution.
On that increase in minimum contribution, does that mean that Chatham, through their assessments for the more wealth coming to town, receives more income, and therefore they are assessed more?
So I guess I think it's up to this town to decide whether they tax more, but I think the state looks at it that there's a larger pool of wealth based on property taxes that are available within Chatham, so that there's more wherewithal within the town to tax. Whether or not the town then decides to tax more is sort of a town decision based on what their funding needs are within the town. But that's how the state comes up with its calculations. So it looks at the property values in the town, and then it looks at the wealth of the people living in the town. And for the Cape, that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to the state, the Chapter 70 formula, because we all know that those folks that are here with us during summertime, oftentimes occupying the houses closer to the water, tend to have a little greater wealth than the families that are here year-round, supporting the industry, the tourist industry, the fishing industry, and the construction housing industry that's underlying that. So the wealth. It's hard for you or I to go and talk to somebody at Stop and Shop and say, hey, I feel like your wealth really increased significantly in the past year, but the property values, I would suggest, are probably largely behind that number.
So, is it fair to say then those people that are here in the summer help defray the taxes or for all of us?
They do. The last piece that we just wanted to talk about, when we met with the budget or the finance subcommittee, we talked about stabilization. And there is something in Massachusetts legislature that's called creating a stabilization fund. And this is something that regional school districts can use to plan for long-term capital expenses. So this is something that the school committee and our group that was talking thinks that this would be a good thing for us to do. There's a disconnect between saying this is a good thing for us to do and actually having it be part of this budget process, and that's because it involves the school committee voting to create a stabilization account, which is an easy thing for you to do, but it also involves us going to both boards of selectmen and making a presentation on why we would want to do this and getting their approval for the stabilization account to happen. So what we would want to do is, in the upcoming months, and this can be part of the budget presentations we take forward to our two towns in the next couple of weeks, is talk about why creating a stabilization account would be good for the district. Having a vote here, getting a vote by both select boards, and then as we're looking forward to FY19, we would have to actually build into our budget a line and say we will fund, just like we funded OPEB in the last 2 years in our budget, to fund and say, okay, we're going to put in $50,000 or $100,000 or some amount of money into stabilization. So we would then build that into our budget process. And that account then becomes something akin to excess and deficiency in that it's a reserve account that the district can use. How it's different than excess and deficiency, it has a specific focus. It's focused on capital projects. Anything that the school district would borrow for, you can use that funding to help defray the cost. And it's also something that the school district has the authority to go and do at any time during the school year. Excess and deficiency is a little more difficult to go and tap into because you have to actually go and reach back out to the selectmen to tap into your excess and deficiency if you're doing outside of the budget cycle. So there we have it, just where we're going with the budget from here. We have presentations coming up at the end of January, the January 30th, or before the Harwich boards. January 31st, we're before the Chatham boards. We have back-to-back evenings there. We have our annual budget hearing February 9th. We have to then submit our budget to the towns by the 17th of March, and then we have the town meetings in May. But, you know, as I put in my email to the staff, I think at the moment we're in a really good place. We're the number behind this budget tonight is a number that Harwich and Chatham are carrying a shared number that all balances out. I think one of the challenges in a regional school district is oftentimes one town or the other town is sort of your limiting factor, and we've been able to kind of go back and forth between the towns and come up with a number that works well for both of them. And there we have it.
Questions for the superintendent? Ms. Stowe.
If we have any concerns, we're just getting this now about this. I see it's going to the libraries and all tomorrow. Will there be an opportunity next, in 2 weeks when we have our next meeting, to address that, or is that too late?
So I think we have repeated opportunities. So I think if there are concerns that the committee has, I think we can start the conversation tonight. We have our next committee meeting on the 26th. Ideally, by the time we have our budget hearing, hopefully we're all on the same page as to what it, what we're spending the funds on. I think if it comes down to things that we would like to, so we could within a budget, you could say, I would like to see us do a VIPS coordinator instead of a bus. Those little things can happen. If it's, I'd like to add a teacher here, then we have to kind of look at, okay, well, what do we not fund to have that happen? Because at the end of the day, the number underlying the budget is one that fits within the Chatham and Harwich wherewithal, and if our number goes up, then it's going to create other things going off kilter in other budgets.
Ms. Stout, you'll note that it is already going to be scheduled for our discussion in 2 weeks from tonight. So I would suggest that to the best of your ability, prepare concerns or proposals between now and then, because we'll then almost immediately be going to be presenting it to the two towns. It would be good that we have dealt with those issues before we then present them to the towns.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Ms. Ryder.
I have a question on slide 21 concerning school choice. For fiscal year 15, you have the revenue and expenditures exactly the same. Is that correct?
So the revenue that's coming in is what we're spending on the going out. So the answer is yes. So if we look at the FY18 budget, we're anticipating in the budget, $1.5 million worth of revenue coming in. We fund within the budget $1.5 million worth of expenses that go out in the budget.
Anybody else? I have a couple of questions. The slide that dealt with the charter school tuition, I don't remember what number it was.
23.
Coincidentally, I was asked this morning by a taxpayer what the average charter school tuition is that the towns pay. So I would assume that it's that number up there divided by the number of students. Well, we already know for 17.
So long and short, charter schools, when you look at a school choice student who comes to our district, who lives in another community, has $5,000 tuition comes with them. And unless they have special education services, in which case the cost, the sort of incremental additional costs of those special education services come with them too. The exact same thing happens if a child chooses to go to Dennis Yarmouth, who lives in Chatham. That child's paying, we end up paying $5,000 out of our budget unless they have special education needs, and it's a little bit more than $5,000. For charter school, it really comes down to the district's per pupil expenditure as calculated by the state. So a charter school child costs roughly 3 times more in terms of the financial impact of that child leaving the district than a school choice student.
Also, I had another question. When you were, you indicated that the overall, on the slide in which you indicated the overall budget increase is 5.16%. Operating budget. How much of the, if you know off the top of your head, or Ms. Izernio knows, how much of the 5.16% reflects required increases as a result of insurance assumptions, contractual requirements? Do we know approximately what percentage of the 5.16% is reflected by things that we have no choice on?
I think potentially this line might address many of those. So salaries and wages, which is 52% of the budget, that's fixed. I mean, one could argue that it's not fixed. You could always reduce staff, but it's a level service budget. So it's fixed in that we have staff that are teachers that are moving steps and lanes. There are those things that are called fixed charges. We know the insurance is fixed, locked in. The capital piece is fixed. It really comes down to that 13.8% that's listed as expenses, and those are expenses that that really get into are we going to have additional textbooks, or if you're a biology teacher, are you going to order one fetal pig for 4 students, or does every student have their own fetal? It comes down to those choices, and so the amount of flexibility you have within a school budget is pretty limited in terms of the choices that you're making. And when you make the choices on those expense lines, it comes down to, do you launch a math and focus program and actually give the kids the workbook, or do they not have a workbook to use? And I think that's, some of the initiatives we put in place is to make sure that we're funding those teaching aides.
There isn't a total on the slide.
Please,
Katie Isarniel, Business Manager. There isn't a total on this slide, but if you do a quick tally, the overall budget is up $1.8 million, so that looks like it's the bulk of it, except for maybe a couple $100,000. Few $100,000.
I think it's, it's important for taxpayers to realize that the 5.16% increase is not because we've decided that we need to buy a lot more things or do a lot more things that we're not already doing.
And I think it's important to look at the health insurance lines. That alone is almost $800,000.
Maybe we could get a percentage for next time. That would be interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that there's a chunk behind this budget that's supported by the state, the Chapter 70 state aid, the windfall that came in this year that we couldn't access because it came in after town meeting process, that we then offset. We slide that to help support programs in FY18. Because we, ideally, and it would have been nice to say, okay, we got more state aid, let's launch more programs, but you really can't do that without holding another town meeting and revoting a school budget.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is subcommittee reports. Are there any subcommittee reports? Hearing none. Okay. Mr. Carpenter, back to you for superintendent's report. Feel free to consider what you just did to be your report.
Just real quick, in your packet, there is a flyer about the legislative breakfast, which I believe is February 3rd. It's 9:30 in the morning at the Collaborative in Osterville. I'd encourage you to go. I had a great conversation with a number of other superintendents from the Cape on our, we'll call it non-snow day last Friday. Our new state senator, Julian Sear, braved the elements and came down from Beacon Hill to meet with the superintendents, and we had a great, almost 2-hour-long conversation with them about education. And it's a nice opportunity to go and have all of the different members of the state legislature representing our area, and to hear from them their thoughts on where the state funding's going and concerns about education. So I'd encourage you to take part in that, and I really appreciated Senator Sear's time that he gave all of us. I also want to just give a little shout out in closing to Bill Burkhead and his staff. At our next school committee meeting, Bill will be doing a presentation on the Jossum lunch power hour and the potential behind it. And I think Bill has done a really nice job of thinking about how that time and how his staff could unite to support all learners and really move, as Bill put it, move a school from good to great. So looking forward to having him present before you at our next meeting.
Thank you. I believe we are down to one action item. Approval of a prior year invoice, or 3 thereof. Ms. Isarniel.
I'm sorry to say you have 3 invoices here that are part of prior years that need your approval. As a reminder, Now, if we are using current year funds to approve a prior year invoice, it requires a school committee approval. The first one is the RPM is actually a collection agency. And this is something that fell through the cracks, that was part of the building project, and this had to do with when we were putting in the security system, and they had to call, and these were long-distance charges to a company in Texas when they were testing the system. This should have been processed through Fontaine Brothers, so we will be paying the invoice, but Fontaine Brothers will be reimbursing us for that $437.38. So
See, you know, my cell phone makes free calls to Texas, so next time you
it's
want.
not cell phone, it was the security system and the cameras are checking and things. Anyway, so that's one. The second one, I'm not sure, is the Nixon Company, and there was a banner that was made, and this invoice it got lost in the sauce somewhere for $95, and there's a third invoice for some soccer socks for $1,106.45 that the company would very much appreciate if we could settle up that invoice.
Any questions, concerns, motions?
Expensive socks.
Pardon me?
I said expensive socks.
I will move to pay the prior invoices for MCI Commercial for $437.38, to We Got Soccer for $1,106.45, and to the Nixon Company for $95.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions? We're going to have a fairly busy agenda the next meeting. Bring your coffee or whatever you use to stay awake. And candy. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much and good evening.